The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get stinko.
This is the Giles and the Goalie podcast as part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. With your hosts, Giles Farrell and Ben Remington.
Hi, this is Bruce Boudreau. I don't see how in Toronto that they're calling it, unless it's a guy they just pulled in off the street that hasn't seen hockey before. If I were the fans, I'd be booing even more, because that, they pay good money for this.
If you want it, don't just think you want it. Go out and f***ing want it.
Welcome, Giles and the Goalie podcast. Back with you another fine-ish week. I am your host, Giles Farrell. That chuckle is Ben Remington.
Hello.
Yeah. What a blar week. There's no other way to put it. Yeah. Wow. What a difference a week can make. Last week at this time we were singing the high praises of Bill Guerin for his trade of Jason Zucker, and now here we are a week later, and I'm not going to say we've completely flipped the script here, but we've had some drastic changes in our thinking.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. He hasn't reached Crazy Pills Paul level of mistrust. That just goes to show like how much we didn't believe in Paul Fenton almost instantaneously. Or, I mean, took a couple of months, but when he did it, he did not back down. So anyway, no, I think that I don't know. It's tough to like the move of firing Bruce Boudreau when you were a fan of Bruce Boudreau, as we both are, and after the initial shock, and I guess we can get into it, but after the initial shock, I feel like I see it logically, but it still doesn't really make me like it anymore.
There's an objective point that I've come to. Like, once the shock and junk wears off, the objective part of me still has issues just trying to logically see the timing of this firing. The Wild were 7-3-1 in their last 11, and as I noted on Zone Coverage, the Wild were playing absolutely tremendous hockey. They were scoring goals. They were getting great goaltending, 9th best goaltending in the league. In those 11 games. And then a change is made at the head coach to get a new voice, get the team on a better path. And are you expecting to go 11-0-0 in these games? The only thing that I was coming to terms with was, you make this move and you have a head coach in mind that you want to hire very, very quickly, because I can see you want to move on from Boudreau and go get your guy. But in the press release and the later press conference that Guerin did, Dean Evison was named interim head coach for the remainder of the year, and then a full search would be conducted in the offseason. So that further brings my question of the timing to why now. And then we just saw an absolute turd of a hockey game on Saturday that the Wild laid, and that went, not well, as I best described it as a turd. And there was a GIF from Hockey Wilderness that showed the timeout that the Wild took with 45 seconds left or whatever in the hockey game, and Dean Evison was just standing there doing nothing. The assistants were standing there doing nothing. The players did all the talking.
Yeah.
So, again, I ask, why now as an objective analyst, not as one who irrationally loved Bruce Boudreau and made many, many gifs of his fine antics?
I agree. The timing of it is weird because they literally went through a trademarked swoon in January. They lost 7 out of 10 games.
There were other times they could have done that.
I don't know of a better time to fire a coach than after a swoon, but that seems like a pretty good time to fire a coach. But ultimately, the thing that I think bothers me the most about this is, and you know, we're woke enough to be process over results guys, right? We're hashtag woke.
We're not woke.
The results here we don't like either. Don't get me wrong. We don't like the result of Bruce being fired. Subjectively, we don't like it. Objectively, we've been talking about this all season. This isn't anything that's crazy and outlandish, and everyone knew it was coming at some point. But the process to which Guerin got there was, I expect this to be a playoff team. And they need a new voice for this playoff run. And that's what bothers me ultimately, is either you're A, delusional, or B, you're feeding us full of bull. So I don't know which path he's going down. I don't know which path he went down to get there. But either way, I don't like it. And it's like, you can fire Bruce Boudreau and you can say in the GD press conference, oh, sorry, he wasn't my guy. His contract's at the end of the season. What do? You know? This is how professional sports work. But don't tell us that you're doing it to make a playoff push 3 days after you traded one of your best players away for picks and prospects. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. And yes, we love the package we got for Jason Zucker, but that does not help this team make the playoffs. And so then don't turn around 3 days later, 4 days later, and tell us, oh, I'm firing Bruce so this team can make the playoffs. Like, what? Well, what do you, like, that makes no sense at all. And so, again, you fire Bruce Boudreau. We've expected all year. We've talked, I think, every other week probably this season about his job security and or lack thereof. So it shouldn't have been that shocking to anybody. But it was because of the timing, and it was, to me, even more so because of the reasoning. There was no real good reasoning there. If you want to say, hey, I want to give Dean Evison a look as an NHL head coach. We want to see what we have in this guy. Maybe he's going to be our head coach going forward after Boudreau's contract is up, whatever. Paul Fenton sure seemed to like him. That's a harbinger of something. But yeah, that's been my issue with it. It doesn't seem like it's up front, or if it is, it's nonsensical at best.
For a team that sure loves to, brand their fans as the best and smartest in hockey, they sure do love feeding them heavy doses of bull.
Oh, God, yeah, with a shovel.
So here's my take from the two paths you laid out. One, they're just delusional. Well, then you're up S Creek.
Right.
Two, they're just feeding everyone a load of bull, which probably more likely.
Right.
But also, then don't push the fact that you have the smartest and best fans in hockey, because then everyone figures out that you're feeding them a load of bull.
Yeah.
So just say what you really think. Don't beat around the bush. I'm tired of being beaten around the bush.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. You don't want to have the full-on, like, Astros PR nightmare and be, like, indignant about your wrongdoings. You don't want to go that far with it. I understand that. But there's a level of sugarcoating that you just don't need to go to. And telling us that you fired Bruce because you think this team can make the playoffs, is just it insults our intelligence, or like I said, it's so delusional that I don't even want. It makes me lose faith in the process, because it's like, if you honestly think that, with statistically, and you talked about how good the goaltending's been of lately, but if you look at the whole season, there's a lot of metrics that have the Minnesota Wild as the capital THE worst goaltending in the NHL, and it's believable by what we've seen.
Weird how another head coach fell victim to bad goaltending. Gee, where have I seen that before?
Yeah, only 8 times in the NHL this year. And so it's like, what makes you think this is a playoff team? What makes you think this team? I mean, they have good people on defense, sure, absolutely, good defensive core. They play a great defensive game. They have some contributors on offense. Let's not go crazy and say this is a good offensive team. So, let's put them break even, and that's probably generous, to be honest. And then you have horrific goaltending. What about that screams playoff team?
Nothing.
No.
Except 2 home playoff games and no more.
Well, and honestly, what are the chances? What odds do you put on the Wild making the playoffs at this point? I mean, is 5% too generous? I feel like that might be too generous.
Well, I wouldn't. I'd give them more than 5%. I'd say, being generous, I'd say they got a 1 in 4 shot. But that's only if the good goaltending that they've seen in the last 3 weeks continues on through the remainder of the season, and they somehow play much, much better than that turd we saw on Saturday afternoon. For reference, MoneyPuck.com has the Wild at 39.2% to make the playoffs.
Their model, and I don't know what's wrong with it, but their model has always been very high on the Wild, probably because their expected goal rates is great.
It's heavily based on expected goals, which the Wild lead the league in expected goals against, meaning their defense is very, very good, which even more puts a exclamation point, several exclamation points on the fact that their goaltending has been bad.
Yeah.
So back to Boudreau. The most point percentage by a head coach in Wild history. He,
I believe, third most in the NHL history, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And he was so taken aback by the move happening at this point, he just had a few choice words and walked out the door.
Yeah.
Didn't really listen to anything else from Bill Guerin when he was fired. I would have loved to have heard those choice words. Well, we got a few of them, but I would have loved to have heard the rest.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think now, at some point to kind of eulogize Bruce Boudreau's time here, and I think probably the best thing you can say is he milked everything he could have out of each of the teams he coached here.
Mm-hmm.
And his first year, he had that record-setting 106 point
6 or 8, yeah.
Team that they had that 12-game winning streak in December. They are almost a Central Division winning team. Outside of a March swoon, they would have been. Got smoked in the playoffs by Jake Allen. Yes. And then the next year, again, another 100-plus point team. And this, mind you, where they had traffic cone Kyle Quincy on the back end for 2 months.
God.
And that team absolutely should not have been a 100-point team, and they still were a 100-point team.
Mm-hmm.
And then last year, the wheels just fell off, and somehow they were still into the mid-80s in terms of points. And they were creeping right back into the playoff picture this year, and you could argue because Boudreau had somehow, again, milked the most out of this team, despite the fact they have league worst goaltending.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably how I'll remember him, is he got the most out of mediocre rosters.
I would agree with that. I think there are some folks that don't necessarily see it that way, and that's fine. Your opinion on Bruce as a coach can change, but
you
that's
can blow it out your ass.
that too. I wrote a long, thought-out eulogy, but it really doesn't matter all that much. I think what I took from Bruce, and this is why I was such a big fan, and why you were such a big fan, why everyone is a big fan of Bruce Boudreau. He never, well, I shouldn't say never. He didn't always give you the canned answer.
Yes,
there was a lot of times
a devoted segment every
right.
week on this damned podcast.
Yeah,
the Bruce Boudreau quote of the week.
In a sport where coach speak and players speak and GM speak are all one and the same, and they're all absurdly predictable.
No league loves to get off more on canned speak than the NHL.
Bruce was finally a breath of fresh air in that he was, kind of the everyman and a little vulgar, which was great, and he was passionate and he was emotional, and you could see that, you could feel that in all of his answers. That he answered interview questions like one of your friends drinking a beer with you, and that was something that was so refreshing, especially coming from Mike Yeo, who. There was literally a template that Mike Yeo used to answer. I'm not going to say that we played like crap tonight, but we didn't play as well as we would have liked. And that was every Mike Yeo answer in a nutshell.
Template.
That was the template for him. So it was just so nice to finally get it. And we knew this coming in, obviously, and everyone had seen Bruce Boudreau's antics before. It was so nice to finally get that, and to have a coach with that kind of fire and that kind of emotion, where you knew he gave a crap, and you knew that he wasn't going to give you the same answer that everyone else was going to give you. And so that's how I want to remember Bruce Boudreau. That's how I think I will remember Bruce Boudreau. Is he was a real guy. He was just a real dude, like a human being, and it was so far removed from the NHL's robotic ways.
Trying to think of if there's anyone else even close to him in terms of just being animated and post-game pressers.
Torts.
You've got a much condensed Torts now in Columbus, because it's not the media hotbed that New York or
Right.
Vancouver was.
And I'm not saying that Torts is a good coach or anything. I'm just saying he's
right.
animated.
You still get angry Torts every now and again after his team plays like crap, and he just shows up and he just says, "We played like crap. I'm not taking any questions," and walks off.
Right.
But
yeah, but they're few and far between.
Yeah.
I mean, even the giants of the game, even Quenneville and Cooper and even Babcock before he was canned, and the guys who were the elite quote unquote coaches of the NHL, even they gave the canned answers all the time. And it just, even the best players do that all the time. And so it's just so nice to finally get somebody who's going to say, we bleeped this, and this was like bleep, and bleeping this and bleeping that. And it was like, oh, hey, that's how I talk when I'm not podcasting. So it's kind of refreshing.
I'm curious to see where he goes next, if he goes somewhere next. It sounds like he still has the fire to coach again, so it will be fascinating to see if somebody in the near future picks up the phone and gives him a call. And we kind of looked through the list of NHL head coaches earlier who weren't replaced before April 2019, and there's kind of few landing spots possibly for him, but you never know. So
it's tough. I think that there's probably going to be teams that are going to want him, but I hope that he finds a good situation. If he does find a situation, I don't want to see him take, like we talked about, the Sharks job. Maybe the Sharks is a better job than we think it is, but
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, and so I don't want to see him take a job like that and just ride the end of that ship, be there
No,
when the
he
window.
rode the end of a ship here. I think he's going to be looking for something, either on
I
the
just don't want to see him
cusp of a cup or on the way up.
But that's tough to find. I mean, those coaches don't get fired, so it's like, how do you find that situation without a complete swing in a team, which doesn't happen very often either. So it's tough. It's really tough, and as much as we would like to see him find something great, the possibility's out there that he doesn't. And I don't know.
So, what are you looking for next for a Wild head coach? And I will ask this, and I'm not sure I can give an appropriate answer at this point because I have a few thoughts. And I didn't necessarily buy into this when it kind of crept out with Mike Yeo, but now that it is creeping out again, I come to the belief of where there's smoke, there is fire. And when you start to hear little snippets about maybe the players were pissed because of their ice time or lack thereof, and I'm talking about the older guys in the room, then I tend to believe we have issues.
Yeah, that was in the Russo article. Where there was mention to it. And
this has been a highly debated topic on the old Twitter.com in the last 3 days.
Yeah.
And I'll say this. If you are just going to get a head coach who just is going to just be a yes man to these guys, then what's the point?
Yeah.
What is the damn point? You need a head coach who can put these people in their place, and I don't know how you can, but maybe that's for Guerin to figure out. And he's alluded to a few times, if players aren't pleased with where we're going, then maybe they shouldn't be here.
Right.
Now, that's also easier said than done with some of them.
Right.
But I just, there's a whole can of worms that's being opened here, and yeah, there's coaches out there I'd like to see come in and coach the Wild, but if they're just going to fall victim to this same crap that took down Mike Yeo and took down Bruce Boudreau, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Just go put some schmuck behind the bench and let these guys run the team. As we saw on Saturday when they called timeout and the coaches didn't even say anything.
Yeah, that's, I mean, obviously concerning to say the least, but it seems like the veteran core of this team, and that's what Russo alluded to, was that veteran core wasn't really happy with getting their ice time.
What's that smell? A turd.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know. There might be a problem beyond what a coach could even solve there. And to your point, and it's like,
where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know what you can even do with that. And if no one is going to, if Bruce effing Boudreau doesn't carry enough clout where NHL veterans are like, oh, we should probably listen to this guy, because, coming into here, he had been to the playoffs with every single team he had been coached for a full season. Every single team he had coached for a full season. And if that doesn't get you clout, third most winning percentage in NHL history, if that doesn't get you clout, then what does? And, I think a guy being maybe a little more of a hard ass than Bruce, maybe that's what they need, but I don't know if that's going to work either. Like, that's like saying, the Wild needed Paul Fenton as a general manager because he was a hard ass. Well, that was a spectacular disaster So I don't know that that's necessarily the route you need to go either. So I don't have any one particular attribute of a coach that I'd like to see the Wild hire.
I mean, if we're listing coaches I'd like to see the Wild hire, like Gerard Gallant comes to mind,
Sure.
Peter Laviolette, when the move was made, I thought, oh, well, then you've got these great candidates out there already, so surely Guerin has to be going after them, but apparently not. I don't... If this is truly the case, and the players in the room just don't seem to give a flying F about what any coach says, and they get demoted for ice time, as they should if they're not playing well,
right?
Then just put some schmuck and just keep Evason behind the bench. He was Paul Finn's guy. Can't be any more of a disaster than Paul Finn. Call up Tim Army after the season. I don't. Well, maybe he can bring Jerry Mayhew with him. I don't care.
Anything will help. With the whole Evason thing, that I've never really. I thought that this was like a tryout for him, but something about it doesn't really feel like that.
Yeah, I don't really get that sense.
And you referenced the turd on Saturday. How many times do you see a coach fired, and then the team just absolutely mops the floor with the other team the following game because they feel bad, because they feel guilty that they got their coach fired? We saw it with Mike Yeo. The team went on a tear after Mike Yeo was fired. And a lot of that, I mean, people don't give human psychology enough benefit. But then you see this game on Saturday, the Wild played, and obviously they still have more games to go. We'll see what happens. But it didn't seem to be that fire there. And so it just kind of makes you wonder what they think about the situation and what, how they see Dean Evason, who's supposedly a fiery guy, a passionate guy. But the team really didn't respond like that. And like you said, that timeout at the end was maybe the most damning thing of all. Have you ever seen a coach's tryout period last one game before? Afterwards, you're just like, nope, over, done, move on.
No, I'm sure there has been in the history of the NHL.
Pyramid wire,
one,
I don't know. Maybe
one game wonders, but there's a lot that needs to be fixed, and I don't know. There's not one head coach is going to come in and fix it, no matter how high I hold them. We wanted Bruce Boudreau from the outset the last time they did a coaching search.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And it didn't really change much.
No.
I mean, the Wild had some good success, and then they missed the playoffs. And we'll probably miss it again this year.
Mm-hmm.
There's flaws on the roster, but you still hear the same damn issues. And it's tiring.
Is it like watching Batman Forever on a loop?
It is. We made a GIF of that. We've got our official The Wild Are Batman Forever GIFs.
Mm-hmm.
Courtesy of Giles and the Goalie podcast. I am just at a loss. I'm still at a loss. There is also that human element that comes with this, and as we talked about, Bruce is such a lovable guy, and you can still see that in his outgoing piece that Russo did. It's just like that was really like the last lovable character to me that the Wild have. Watching Kevin Fiala is nice right now, but it's a struggle to turn on the Wild right now because you know what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to the Rangers game on Thursday, it was so predictable. That's this team's problem. They're so predictable. When they had that goal come off the board for goaltender interference, what did I do? I looked at you and I said, they will lose this game 4-3.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what bloody happened.
Yeah.
They're so predictable. When they have calls like that go the other way, it's so predictable. You need it. What it comes down to is it's time for new voices to be had in the room, and the problem is you're not going to get that for another half decade, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
There's a lot of problems, and do you have anything else you want to add to this? Because I think we can go to our hotline and talk to Dave.
Yeah, that's fine. We can go to that. I have I share the frustration. I don't. It sucks when you don't have any of the answers because you don't know what's happening where, and it's easy to point a finger at a lot of the issues this team has, but when you don't have any way to fix any of those issues, then it just becomes kind of a chasing your tail situation.
Like I've been a glass is half full guy forever. I always try to find the good in things, and right now it is very difficult to find good with this organization, top to bottom.
We've been sinking into negativity all season, Giles.
Oh, I know. I just don't want people to think that my heart has been filled with hate all the time. Actually, I try to like things. That's why we branch out and we like other teams.
Yeah.
Because we like to feel good about our sports. Okay,
sure.
We're going back to the soapbox. Let's go to the hotline. Let's talk to Dave.
All right.
All right. Joining us on the Giles and the Goalie hotline is friend of the show, Dave Schwartz. Dave, as we all know, is a sports anchor and also does Saturday morning Anchorage. That's a fascinating word. On Care 11. For those of you who like to wake up and turn on the news, you can catch Dave there as well. Dave, how are you?
I'm good. First of all, do you sponsor your own hotline for your podcast?
Yes.
It's just as lucrative as getting someone else to sponsor it, honestly. So
It really and a lot easier too.
Yeah,
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, guys. It's been a wild week, if you will.
That's true. You're actually our first non-Tom Schreier guest of the season, so you should be honored here.
Was Tom not available or?
I actually didn't ask.
I am honored to be with you guys. Absolutely.
So, first of all, Dave, were you just as blindsided as we were last Friday with the Boudreau firing?
I wouldn't call it blindsided. I thought the timing was interesting, and I knew, like all of us knew, there was no way he was going to survive this season, anything short of winning a Stanley Cup, which wasn't going to happen. I thought it was interesting that he survived a bad start. He survived the loss against Boston out of the break, and that it's a shootout loss to the Rangers, in which, frankly, they cheated because Artemi Panarin's goal should not have counted. We all know that. That's what does him in. Although it seems like I'm going to guess that Guerin's been wanting to do it for a while now. So it didn't completely blindside me. Also because I know that I what I believe to know is some relationships that he's had with players somewhat strained, but that's not really surprising. I just think that it was a little peculiar, but I knew it was going to happen at some point, and it sounds like Bruce did too.
Yeah, and I guess maybe blindsided wasn't the right term. It just, like you mentioned, the timing of it was very peculiar, as it looked like the Wild were starting to maybe get it together a little bit. They had won 7 out of 11 leading up to it, and it just seemed like an odd time.
Well, and I agree with you, and I think what it looked like to me, and what I don't think it was, is that it was a knee-jerk reaction to a bad loss, which, frankly, it wasn't. I mean, yeah, they were up, but they should have won that game. They played well. They lose in a shootout. That's not the same thing as getting blown out or losing, when you're up 5 goals. They were up by a bit, and they surrendered a lead. But part of me also thinks that the only reason this team is achieving anything this season is because Bruce Boudreau is one heck of a coach. And I don't always agree with his line combinations. I don't always agree with some of the things that he does, although the ironic thing is in the game against the Rangers, when they throw the overtime lineup out there, it was the first time that I looked through all the pairings and went, geez, I really like what he did. Yeah. Normally, I'm like, why in the world is he going with Brodin, Eriksson, Ek, and someone else? Like, those guys aren't explosive. You're playing defensively. But it was one of the first times I remember thinking, hey, Bruce really, he did a nice job here putting these guys out. And then, you get to the shootout. I love that they went with Donato. I didn't like that Parise went second. I really, really thought that Fiala should have gone second the way he's been playing lately. But it seemed to me the way it was done all of a sudden it seems like a knee-jerk reaction, but I think we all know that it wasn't. And I think that it just changes the appearance of what was actually a decision that was a long time coming.
Dave, Bill Guerin cited, making some form of playoff push, and this kind of being the crux of that. I know where I stand on this. How much do you believe that?
I believe it to some degree. I think any general manager coming in wants to win immediately, and I'm sure, the other part of that is you look a little more attractive to free agents if you're winning, or even if you're making the playoffs, and you say, hey, we did make the playoffs last year. We've made it, 7 of the last 8 seasons now, or 6 of them after missing it last year. I don't think it's in his nature or in anyone's nature to purposefully tank. If you wanted to do that, there are other ways, because I actually, as much as I like Zucker, think that they got a pretty good deal for him. So I believe it, and I believe that he wants the team to win, but I think more than anything, he wants everybody in that locker room to be on notice that things are going to be different. And I think that was the whole reason. One of the things behind Bruce Boudreau being let go was, okay, guys, a bunch of you have said to me, or I've heard that Bruce is the problem. Well, now you don't have that problem anymore. So I've eliminated it. Now it's on you to figure out what you're going to do as players. And I really think that this is essentially what he's trying to do. He's trying to say, listen, you're going to do this my way, or it's not going to work and you're going to get out, to some degree. And so now you better show me that if you think Bruce is the problem, you better go out and play. And, we didn't see that against San Jose. They looked listless. They looked ineffective at best against the Sharks the other night. So I tweeted half jokingly, half serious, what's Guerin going to do now? You traded one of their fan favorites. You fired their head coach. I mean, is he going to kill somebody next? I honestly legitimately didn't know. What is this going to be? Ritual beheadings all of a sudden to make sure the team gets going. But it's a little weird, and I would assume more moves are going to come at some point if he can make them.
And you brought up Jason Zucker getting traded earlier in the week. You mentioned you liked that deal. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that? Because
sure.
we were very enamored with the deal that the Wild got back.
Well, I love the deal. I hate that we lost that they lost Jason Zucker, and I say we lost him in the media because Zucker was a great guy. He's probably of all time my favorite athlete that I ever had the chance to cover. He was pleasant to work with, a nice guy in the locker room, and just always gave you good answers. And he was obviously did a lot for the community. But when they traded him, they really got 2 things that they needed to, which was salary cap flexibility once they get Galchenyuk off the books this year, which I'm assuming that they're going to, and they also get younger because now they can pay for some younger guys. They get the defensive prospect who is supposed to be very, very good, and so I think if the trade checks those boxes, we got younger and we got cheaper. Those are 2 really good things. And yeah, it sucks that Jason's gone because his production was good. I would assume his production in Pittsburgh is only going to get better playing with Sidney Crosby every night. I mean, we could all do better with Sidney Crosby on the line. Yeah, exactly. So he's already got 3 points already. I predicted he'd have at least 10 goals more by the end of the season playing with Crosby. But that's why the deal to me, and I said last night on our newscast that this isn't Paul Fenton. He's not just doing deals for the sake of doing him and completely ignoring his scouting staff and everything that they're saying, because that's exactly what Fenton did. When he traded Granlund last year, I have it on good authority that they were fighting all day about not doing this deal, that they did not want to deal Granlund last year, and he did it anyway. Guerin's deals seem a little more well thought out. I didn't feel like he got fleeced at all by the Penguins. I thought both deals were good. So I hate that Jason Zucker's not here anymore, because selfishly I really enjoyed covering him. But I think the deal's great for him to go somewhere else where he knows he's wanted, and he doesn't have to deal with hearing his names all the time. And I think the Wild get exactly what they need, which is a little bit more flexibility to do some stuff, and get Kaprizov here as fast as you can, please.
And we were big fans of Zucker as a player and as a human being as well. Have you ever encountered a player on the Wild or just in the NHL in general that had to go through the meat grinder in the last year and a half as much as he did?
I can't think of anybody. I really can't. I mean, to actually sit there and hear, okay, you might be going to Calgary, or maybe you're going to, Nashville, or wherever else that his name has come up. I don't recall a player having to deal with it as long as he has. And then as soon as he signs his new contract, he has to continue dealing with it. I mean, he had to at some point think, well, what the heck do I have to do to stay here? I'm putting up numbers. They do great stuff in the community. They couldn't trade him last year because all of a sudden he wins the King Clancy Award, and that would look terrible. And so, he does all the things that you're supposed to do. He even gets a modified, a 10-team no-trade clause in his deal, and he still gets dealt, or he still keeps hearing his name all the time. And so part of it is, at least, from what we see, part of it sounds like, hey, these guys, they don't want you. Why would you want to be here? And I get that. But they do want you, but other teams do too. And as much as they did like Zucker, and I thought he was playing fine, I think in the end, it's probably for him, he's pretty happy about going somewhere where they want him, and he doesn't have to listen to his name come up in trade rumors all the time, finally. So I think it's a good deal all around. I mean, I think we're all bummed that he's not going to be here anymore. I felt like he was a guy that every single night put it all on the ice. You never really saw him taking it easy. He was a fierce competitor and just a generally good guy anytime you saw him. So it sucks, but I do think it worked well for all parties involved.
Yeah. Trade deadline, Dave, coming up now in the next week, next Monday to be exact. Do you have any bold predictions or hot takes for what we might see from the Wild before then?
The part of me says that Marcus Foligno could be a guy that's going to go, but I really hope they don't. I think he's a really good locker room guy. I think he's very much outplayed his contract this year, but that could also be a notification, if you're smart, that you sell him while he's at his highest, because the Wild could have done that with Eric Stahl last year and gotten a first-round pick back, and they didn't, and now what do they got? And now they have Stahl, who's aging and is not playing as well as he could be. So I want to say Foligno's not going to go, but I could certainly see a scenario where he does. I still think, especially if this defensive prospect is as good as everyone says, and there's a reason why they wanted him, that maybe we could see a defenseman move. And I mean, you got to look, you do the math and you look and you see the only two guys that are worth anything who don't have no trades on defense, or at least I know that don't have no trades, are Brodin and Dumba. I think it's Dumba. One of them has a 10-team no trade that kicks in this summer. I forget which one that is. So I could see them dealing one of them. Plus, they do have a lot of some defensive depth. I mean, they've got a lot of good guys. They got Nick Seal. Oh, wait, no, they let him go for nothing. Sorry about that. Yeah, that one, that ticked me off more than any deal they've made so far, but that's another story for another time. They do have defensive depth, and at least for the most part, and if they think this kid who's coming up that they got in the Pittsburgh deal is good, I could see them trying to deal one of those guys, because they're definitely sought after. Brodin and or Dumba, both are very sought after. If I had my choice, I'd probably deal Dumba before I dealt Brodin, just because I think Brodin is so smooth and such a good stay-at-home defenseman, and I like Dumba, but he's very risk-reward, he can look great and he can look terrible in the same series of events. And so, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. So I could see them getting a lot for him too. So I think if they're going to deal one, I'd probably deal Dumba, but I don't know. I mean, who knows at this point? Like I said, it's very unpredictable because you just don't know where Guerin's going to go next. I'm sure he's getting phone calls all the time, talking to people about what he wants, but at least in his first trade that I've seen, I think he's going to be patient and make sure he gets the right deal.
Yeah, and to your point, Dumba is the one with the no trade clause that kicks in next season. And also kind of adding fuel to the fire a little bit, that Cale Addison kid that they added is a right-handed defenseman, which is very sought after. And the reason why Dumba is even more valuable than he otherwise would be is because he's right-handed. So kind of, there's a lot of evidence there.
And you could get a lot for him.
Right.
You could get a lot for a guy of Dumba's skill and caliber. And then if you have this Addison kid who's going to come in and be really good, maybe you save yourself some money. Maybe you get yourself a really good scoring forward, or maybe you finally get yourself a number one goalie, or at least a more consistent number one goalie than the Wild have right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's not, we're still a season away from it, but the expansion draft looming in 18 months ish. It's time for teams to start looking at having two goalies and knowing they can only protect one. Kind of like how you saw with Pittsburgh and the Matt Murray, Marc-Andre Fleury situation. If teams want to get out ahead of that a little bit, this might be the time, or even maybe push back a little bit to this summer for teams to strike on cashing in on having two starter caliber goalies.
Well, you have to in today's NHL. It's so hard. Most of the really, really good teams do have two good goalies because you just can't ride one guy every night of the season. It's really, really difficult. And I think, to that expansion draft point, kind of goes back to the defense. I've seen a number of mock drafts that say Brodin could go in that draft. So now, do you let him go? Do you let him go for nothing, knowing that you may lose him if he goes in that draft? So all these things kind of play in, but I agree. And I like Alex Stalock a lot. I think he is a really, really good top-end second starter. I don't necessarily think he's your number one goalie, but he's probably one of the best backups in the NHL, in my opinion. I love the way he plays. Devin Dubnyk, he's been through a lot this year. He's a really, really good guy, but he's just not the same as he was. And I don't know if that's a head thing, if it's an age thing, or whatever it is. But Devin Dubnyk does not look like the goalie he once was, or maybe he looks like the goalie he once was to all the other teams that let him go, and he's finally come back to earth here at the Wild. But either way, I can't imagine them opening night next year going with Devin Dubnyk as their goaltender.
And then, last question for Dave before I let you go. Ultimately, what do you think happens here in the remaining 20-ish games for the Wild? Do they sneak into the playoffs, or do they continue with what we saw in the first game of the post-Boudreau era, kind of a lifeless effort that sinks them back into the draft lottery?
My heart says I'd rather them not make it and just sink back into the draft lottery, to be honest with you, because I think at this point, that's the best case scenario for them. Get a couple of, maybe you have some money to sign a couple of free agents. You draft two really good players. You get Kaprizov here. Maybe one of those guys you draft is ready next year or a year later. And then in 2 years, you got yourself four of your forwards are brand new and ready to go. I just, their schedule isn't terrible this back half of the year. The first half of the year was their tougher portion. But I didn't really like what I saw with them responding to Dean Evison the other night. And I just, coaching's too important, and it's too serious in the NHL to just have a lame duck coach. And you could see it there was a timeout where they stopped and Evison just sat there and Parise told everybody what to do. And that is not a new voice, as Bill Guerin calls it. That's no voice. Yeah. There's nobody now. So, I don't know if one of the other things, one of my other working theories on this was that they got rid of Boudreau now because there is someone that Guerin wants, and he doesn't want to wait for them to hit the free agent market. Peter Laviolette is out there. Doug Wade is out there. Gerard Gallant is out there. All those guys are out there. They're good coaches, and they're going to be available. But there's also going to be a lot of teams that they're going to compete with. So maybe Guerin is smarter than everybody else and thought I better get rid of Boudreau now, and then in a week or two I'll hire a new guy. He hasn't done it yet. I don't know. I know he's traveling this week. I don't know what he's traveling for, if he's going to the games or if he's just walking around and doing interviews. Who knows? But I do know that he's out doing something this week. So that was my working theory all along. I just don't see this team together enough and talented enough at this point to make a run and to sneak in. I could see them missing it by 2 or 3 points, but I do see them missing the postseason this year.
Yeah, no, and that would make a lot of sense for firing Boudreau at the time he did, and we talked about timing earlier. And I'm trying to keep a level head when it comes to that, but Bruce was just so gosh darn likable. It's just so hard to move on.
He was, and I will say, I mean, he knows hockey. He's a talented coach. He knows what he's doing. I just think that there were some personalities, and we'll leave it at that, in that locker room that didn't get along with Bruce, and eventually that does you in. If you don't have, one of the reasons why Joel Quenneville was so successful in Chicago is that he had Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. And Jonathan Toews was notorious for taking Quenneville's message and disseminating it to the team himself. And that makes a big difference when it comes from your captain, who's going to hold you accountable, as opposed to your coach, who you can kind of sneak around or whatever you will. That makes a big difference. That's why they were really, really good. That's why in the NFL, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady have won so much. Brady runs a very, very tight ship because that's what Belichick wants. And when your captain and your leader is the guy that's doing that, everybody falls into line. I don't think the Wild have that here. And that's not necessarily a knock on anybody, and I'm not going to name any names, but they haven't had that here. And so that was kind of what marred Bruce's tenure, and frankly, also marred Mike Yo's tenure, and also marred John Torchetti's tenure. And we keep going, and Todd Richards. They just don't have that guy who's bought into that and then helps out the team. And so they've got to find a coach who's going to, be a player's coach to some degree, but also hold them to a high standard. I've heard Laviolette is a great coach, and guys, I have a friend who played for him and absolutely loved him. So my initial thought was, oh, great, they're going to go get Laviolette, but they haven't yet. I don't know as much about Glenn. I don't know as much about Doug Waite, but I do know about Laviolette, and I think he would do a great job as a coach here. So there's a lot of work to be done. This team is in a world of hurt right now. The franchise is. But it's not all bad, and change is good, even if it takes a long time.
All right. Before we let you go, Dave, is there anything you want to plug upcoming you got going on, or just where can people find you?
Oh, you can always find me on Twitter. I know you guys love to find me on Twitter at Dave_Schwartz. I will be posting in momentarily I did an op-ed piece last night on our 10 o'clock news about, everybody needs to buy into what the Wild are doing, because this is a good thing, whether you like it or not, whether you like the way it's happening or not. Guerin is doing the right things, and I do truly believe that. I know not everybody believes, kind of sees my point of view, but change is a good thing, especially when you missed the playoffs last year, and especially when the only time you do make the playoffs, you're out in the first round. So I'll be posting that momentarily. You can see that on Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff. And, of course, you can always watch me on TV when you want to watch me.
Yes, absolutely. Always gives me another excuse to say the word Anchorage.
I love how the state became a verb. It's
yes.
Very good.
Yes.
The city became a verb. Excuse me. See, I'm even worse.
Exactly.
The state of Anchorage. The city of Anchorage.
See, now that makes me think of the old WCHA days. Now,
What's a Seawolf?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. The good old WCHA. That's another podcast for another time.
Yeah.
No kidding.
One time in the off season, we'll have to have you come out in studio with us, and we can just go off on whatever, because it gets so boring in the off season.
I would be more than happy to do that, as long as at this time I'm getting 2 donuts. Maybe I can get 3 for that one.
Yeah,
and we'll make it a deal.
Yeah, we'll double it. I'll put it on Tom's tab.
That sounds good. While you're there, have him get me one of those New York Islanders Gordon's Fisherman's jerseys. That's my white whale. I need one of those.
We are always going to get one of those. So.
Yes.
Oh, it's outstanding.
Yeah. Well, all right, Dave. Thanks so much for joining us, and like we said, we'll hope to get you on again in the off season.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Dave.
Well,
That
Dave left no stone unturned. I cannot.
Dave is such a
Stress that
professional.
enough.
He is so much better at this
And
than we
Dave
are.
is the same way. He's the same way. Right before I went to before we went to Dave, I said, "My glass is half full," kind of guy.
Yeah.
Dave's the same way.
Yep.
And he just took a big steaming turd
Yeah.
on the Wild.
Yeah.
That's the theme.
I mean, he was very good at veiling it because he's a, he's a
That's
sports
that-
guy. He's got a
that's
lot of
that
friends
TV
in this
speak.
town. Exactly. But yeah, if you read between the lines, and hopefully Dave doesn't get too upset with this, but if you read between the lines of what Dave said, he just kind of took a whole blowtorch to the Wild locker room, as Giles was mentioning before we went to the call. That's not something to underrate with somebody who has some connections in the room. We certainly have not had the pleasure of talking to Michael Russo about said situation, but his answer might be even more complex and more veiled if you were to do it in public.
I need my favorite drink in hand at all times when we have that discussion. As
Yes.
I mentioned in the mailbag on Saturday at
Sure.
Zone Coverage, the Q39 Old Fashioned.
Yes,
Just inject that in my veins.
that's not safe. I think Dave hit on a lot of good points. I don't necessarily agree with him with everything, but it's tough. It's tough when, and I will say this, and there's going to be all sorts of these people coming out of the woodwork saying that basically Ryan Suter single-handedly got Bruce Boudreau fired. I don't know that Guerin made this decision based on players' input. We haven't heard anything to that effect. We heard about the veterans being a little butthurt in the Russo piece. Dave certainly made very, very opaque mentions to that when we just talked to him. But I think if he had completely lost the locker room, I think we would have heard about that in a little bit more grand fashion than this. And if some veterans are upset they're not getting playing time, well, that's one thing. But it's not like Bruce's deployment was terrible. I think there's certainly things that a lot of people disagreed with. There's a lot of things that even I can find fault with for Bruce as far as his deployment goes.
Yeah, we'll never always agree with a head coach on lines that he puts out or line changes he makes in games, but that's a method to their madness, and we'll never understand. NHL head coaches are, especially Bruce, they're nuts. They have to think highly outside the box. They're kind of like goalies, not as crazy as goalies, but they're up there.
It's a chess match,
right?
And look at Bobby Fischer. I mean, greatest chess player of all time. It's certifiably insane. And so coaches are kind of a notch down from that, where you don't necessarily understand what they're doing with deployment, but to them it makes sense, and that's their prerogative, really. And so I don't know. I didn't take such a grand issue with any of Bruce Boudreau's deployments that I thought he should have been fired.
Right.
And I don't think that was the reason he got fired necessarily. I know Guerin publicly bemoaned a little bit, but I think that ultimately this boils down to he's not Guerin's guy, and his contract was up at the end of the season, and it's as simple as that. And hopefully that, again, the delusions come in, but who knows?
My last thought on this before we quickly transition into the trade deadline preview, which is highly overshadowed now. I don't like the vibe, and I don't know if this is, the right on, or if this was the intent even, but there was just this vibe on Friday that I got from Guerin that this was just a knee-jerk reaction to the loss on Thursday.
Yeah.
And, I know that's probably less than 2% chance of being the case,
Sure.
but that's just the vibe I got just on some of the things he said in his presser, and just how the Wild collapsed on Thursday night in the third period. And, Michael Russo had some good points about that in one of his one of his radio hits.
Mm-hmm.
Just how there were so many players who were having bad nights that it was, there were only so many players you could put out there in the third period. And, I get that. But I didn't care for that vibe. And if that is indeed a reality, that it was a knee-jerk reaction to a loss where you had a goal come off the board for BS goaltender interference and a shootout goal that was extremely questionable to have been allowed, then there are a lot of issues. That still speaks to me that Bill Guerin, the player, is there, not Bill Guerin, the general manager. Because that's a very player-ish knee-jerk reaction.
And it probably was more something that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Where it's like, he said he had been thinking about it for months. Which
like
again...
the Paul Fenton death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Right. We had been talking about it for months in that Bruce, probably wasn't going to last the season. Or if he was going to finish out the season and that would be it. This was Bruce Boudreau's last season in Minnesota, bar none. And I think everybody could agree on that. So I think that there's probably a certain amount to that Rangers game being true, where that finally snapped Guerin. And that doesn't mean that he did it only solely because of that game, where it was like, they lost this one game that I'm really upset about, he has to be fired. Where it was like, he had been mulling it over for how long now? Weeks, months, whatever. And, that's the throw your hands up moment. That is the final straw, and that's it. And so I do believe that to a certain extent, but that phrasing it like that, like he did, like you mentioned multiple times, where he talked about that's a game we should win, that's a game we should win. That doesn't do you any favors with looking like you're making a competent and sound decision.
Right.
Where you're using a one-game sample size for any kind of judgment whatsoever on anything, let alone hiring or firing an NHL head coach.
We'll have more on the head coaching search and whatnot coming weeks on this podcast. Whatever.
That's fine.
I'm ornery. I'm tired, and Bruce is gone. I'm not happy.
Well, you woke up in Iowa this morning. I can't blame you for being upset.
Yeah.
You woke up very early in Iowa this morning.
Well, I had
so
to come back to work, and for reasons, I had to be in Iowa this weekend. So
sure.
Trade deadline coming up next Monday. We will not have another show until then. Actually, might for timing purposes this week, I might cut the mailbag and take some of the questions we had and put that in some maybe trade deadline centric questions you might have for us, and maybe do like a YouTube hit later in the week, since
sure
I don't really have anything to do. Let's be honest.
You don't have a wedding coming up or anything.
No, I have to stay in so I can save money. Trade deadline coming up. There's still some names floating around out there. For the trade deadline in the Wild, Jonas Brodin, Matt Dumba. Dave kind of hit on this a little bit, and you couldn't tell, but when he brought up Marcus Foligno, I was flailing my hands around like an idiot, going, "Thank you." It's like the Michael Scott, "Thank you."
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, thank you. Somebody out there besides us also maybe believes you should try to cash out while ahead. But anyway, what do you think we'll see in the next week? Yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what we'll see. I do believe that the Wild will make another trade, but I don't know that it's going to be what we really want.
Yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be selling low on Matt Dumba.
I do too, and I'm worried about that. Like, you and I and our friend Tony from The Athletic had a group DM where we're talking about the Dumba being dealt, and there are some exciting names out there that he could be dealt for.
Right.
My concern is that he's not going to be dealt for one of those exciting names.
Right.
And so he has a modified no trade clause, as we mentioned with Dave, kicks in next season. He's still very young. He's right-handed. He has loads of potential to be a high-scoring defenseman. These are all very, very incredibly valuable things in the NHL, and all reasons why he still very well could be dealt for a decent package of players right now. But you also can't deny he's had a terrible season.
Yeah.
I mean, really, honestly terrible. And when we're big Matt Dumba fans here, and he has not had a good year. And so I just worry about what the return would be if, and the team that's receiving him, in fairness, they're just banking on his potential and not his productivity this year. And so it's like you can't really blame them for underpaying, but here's the Wild selling low on another guy versus selling high on a guy like Foligno, who's having a great year, 1 year left in his contract, or selling high on a guy like Brodin, who, granted, is having a good year defensively, very, very good year defensively, incredibly good year by a lot of metrics, but, the whole left-handed defenseman situation, it's like, I don't want to say they grow on trees, but the Wild seem to be coming up with a fair amount of good ones. So it seems to me like this team could more easily replace Jonas Brodin, and they might not miss Marcus Foligno as much as, let's say, Dumba at his full potential.
Right. And it's tough, but it also feel like the trade for, I was going to bring this up with Dave, but I didn't butt in. The trade for Zucker, the defenseman Addison, the right-handed offensive defenseman, it feels like that could be Dumba's replacement.
Oh, 100%.
And so that's why I have a little bit more credence to the notion that he could very well be traded before next Monday's deadline. But I guess if Guerin does have one thing going for him at the moment, it's that he is patient with trades, at least his first one. Small sample, but he seems to be wanting to make sure he gets the best possible deal. So if he can't move either one of them for what he wants, like a potential top center, then he's not necessarily inclined to.
Sure.
And if he actually is trying to make the playoffs, then I don't know why he would at this point.
But this team can make the playoffs, Giles. They need a new voice to make the playoffs. That's why he fired Bruce, because they're going to make the playoffs. They just need a new voice that doesn't speak.
Player, coach, oh no.
Yikes.
It's interesting. There's not a lot in terms of rumors right now. I know, like last week, Toronto was still sniffing around Matt Dumba.
The worst.
They would certainly like a right-handed defenseman, but they're not going to give a package back that would fit what the Wild are looking for. So I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago. Any trade with Toronto would be an immediate loss, regardless of what you're bringing in. So, unless you're getting Austin Matthews, which
You're
bloody
not.
likely.
No, you're not.
Yeah. So I don't know. We'll see. We probably would have had a little bit more on this, but we had a lot of things to say on Bruce, and we had a lot of stuff from Dave. So it.
Yeah,
it's kind of
it's tough because we haven't been in this position a whole lot where the Wild are, or at least should be, obvious sellers at the deadline. Last year we kind of hoped they were, but then they were making all these quote-unquote hockey trades. And so they were kind of in this weird, ether of not buying or selling. This year it's a little bit different because they're obviously selling, and so you're not really looking at players to acquire so much as you're looking for players to get rid of, and what you're getting back is just like, well, if that team that wants this player has a good prospect, then sure, otherwise we're looking at draft picks. And so there isn't a whole lot to analyze there beforehand. And you can kind of analyze it after the fact, but there isn't a whole lot to look out there for ahead of time, where it was like, in years past, it was like, let's look at the players that might be available to trade for. This is a little bit different of a situation that Wild fans haven't been in quite some time. But it's still, if you're into trades, it's kind of exciting nonetheless because, they're getting picks and prospects back and they're getting some value added to their team, and that's not a bad thing.
The song that just came on, that's the song that I used in the podcast intro that directly preceded the Martin Hansel trade the next day. As the Wild got lit up like a blowtorch by Jonathan Taves and the Blackhawks. 'Cause basically I filled that highlight package with Taves goals. What's that song called?
It's called The Game by Motorhead.
Okay. I think it was The Game.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've used that before.
It's a wrestling theme. That's why it's playing in my office right now.
Obviously. Yeah. So we're going to, I think, unless you got anything else to add, I think we're going to call it a show, and I'll expunge on the mailbag a little bit later in the week.
Yeah, that's fine. I can assist with that as well. We'll see. Sorry to those who gave us questions. We got a lot of questions.
Yeah, we did. We just ran out of time.
Maybe we could have held off a week on that, but that's fine. But yeah, look forward to that, and look forward to our analysis of what may or may not happen at the trade deadline next Monday, and we'll kind of go from there.
I'm going to go home and go to sleep.
Sounds good.
Sounds like a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can follow Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell, podcast Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. Thank you to Dave Schwartz for joining the show. Follow him at Dave_Schwartz on Twitter. Please tweet at Dave the word Anchorage, and he'll understand.
Or simply the Alaska Anchorage Seawolves logo.
I cannot believe I said Anchorage.
You said it, and I wasn't about to correct you.
That should just go to show how tired I am. That word, just whatever. Yeah. If you subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, please leave us a rating to combat the dingbat known as Apple is 1984.
Quit giving him
I don't care.
Fame.
I'm angry.
Okay.
If you listen on iTunes and you don't subscribe, please smash that subscribe button. It helps prop us up in the iTunes algorithms, which make no sense. We are also on SoundCloud. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play. Subscribe, download, wherever you take in your podcasts. You can also find our shows at zonecoverage.com/wild, along with the written content I am quickly hammering out day by day on trades, firings, coaching search, and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that will wrap it up for us this week, and we will chat with you again next week.
Later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Gill and the Goaltender podcast.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.